Our Father, we thank you that you have called us to the everlasting love of you who first loved us. And we pray that we would therefore love others as you have loved us. In Christ's name, amen. As you know, we're doing these Four Loves by C.S. Lewis. How many of you have read that? I think a few of them. Tom, you'd read that. A few have read that. And it's pretty rare for people to have read this is not his better known book. And it was written about 1960, later in his life. And he died in 1963, same day as you know that JFK and also Aldous Huxley, they all died the same day. And so it's interesting that Peter Kraft, who's a philosopher at Boston College, wrote a book called Between Heaven and Hell. And what happens is Lewis and Huxley and Kennedy go to a waiting room between heaven and hell. And they're having a dialogue before they go to their final disposition. And it's a brilliant way of doing this because, of course, Lewis represents theism, and Huxley represents a kind of I would call it an amorphous Eastern philosophy, pantheism at best, or not entirely atheism, but a kind of a panentheism or pantheism. And then the other one, Kennedy, is representing humanism, basically, because although he was a Catholic, he basically was more of a humanistic. So you have these three religions, kind of three worldviews, and it was ingenious how it all kind of came together. At any rate, Lewis then, 3 years before his homecoming to the Lord, wrote this wonderful book, and we were talking last time about the loves for the subhuman. We're going to be exploring that just a little bit more, and then go from there. But in general, he identified three kinds of love, and he identified need love, which cries to God from our poverty, as he puts it, gift love, which longs to serve or even to suffer for God. And then the third one, all of these are relating him to God, is appreciative love, the third love. We give thanks for thy great glory. And need love says of a woman, I cannot live without her. Gift love longs to give her happiness, comfort, protection, if possible, wealth. Appreciative love gazes and holds his breath and is silent, notices that such a wonder should exist. And he goes on to say that if for him, will not be wholly dejected by losing her, would rather have it so than ever to have seen her at all. So he says we murder to dissect. Actually, all of our loves are combinations, strange combinations of both need love, of gift love, and appreciative love, and they mix accordingly. And it's very complex. But he speaks of two kinds of love, as I mentioned before, the love of nature. And just to sum that up a bit more, because I didn't quite complete that, people who lay themselves bare to the sheer beauty of the natural world. And I hope that you're training yourself to see in things what you did not see before. I marvel at certain trees. So at Peachtree in Piedmont, there's a tree on the northeast corner. And it's just right on that corner, and it's just a marvel. And you just look at each of these things. Each has a personality, each is unique. And the more you see, the more you are able to see, and the more you realize it's an indicator of who God really is. And so Lewis describes this as well, this idea of look and listen and attend. We don't learn our theology from it, but we get some insights about God in terms of his eternal power and divine nature. That's clearly seen, being understood through what's been made. But nature gave the word glory a meaning for me, as he put it. Gave the word glory a meaning, and it's the glory of nature that we use and becomes a window of apprehension of God if we construe it that way. Again, it's very few, even believers, seem to grasp this, but the scriptures abound with texts that invite us, in fact, command us to worship God through the glory of the world and the heavens and the earth, which declare his word. But they take that as an option, not a command. And so as a consequence, they diminish their composite grasp of God. They're not able to see the beauty that he approaches us through. As I relate the beauty and to the goodness, rather to truth, because beauty points to truth, and truth points to goodness. It's the Spirit of God, the beauty of God, who points to the Son of God, the Logos of God, the truth of God, who then always points beyond himself to the goodness of God, the Father, you see, the wellspring of all that is good and true and beautiful. And so it has always been so that the Spirit points to the Son and the Son to the Father. And that's why I have this Trinitarian formula I use all the time, that I would walk by the Spirit, abide in the Son, and trust in the Father. Sometimes I go backwards. But it's a very powerful way of eliciting my relationship with the triune Godhead. He says, in nature, he said, awakened certain longings in me. In fact, in one statement he made, he said, the greatest thing in my life has been the longing to find out where the beauty comes from. You see, so that idea of beauty is very central in his thinking, and is central as well in his fiction and nonfiction. You'll see it very beautifully explored in both I think Paralandra would be out of the Silent Planet as well, some of the scenes there, but especially Paralandra, just sumptuous, these floating islands. Just look at them and just think about the beauty that's involved in this description of these fruit that is so exquisite that you dare not take another bite, because it'll splash on you, and it's more than you can bear. It's the idea. So he certainly had a love for that. And I think that is an appreciation. But he also writes correctly that it can become a nature religion. Unless you bring it under the authority of God, it can become a demon. Because you see, nature cannot satisfy the desires she arouses, nor answer the tough questions. Nature points to the eternal power and divine nature of God, but it would never reveal that he is the lover of your soul. You see, so there's more that you need, not just the world of God, but you need what else? The Word of God. You need his general revelation, and then you need his special revelation in Scripture. And Scripture is the inspired Word. And you'll remember how I summoned them all up in my view of Christ. Again, the Spirit and pointing to the Son, and the Son to the Father. By means of the four words of God, and how I put it. I'm not trying to make you memorize this, but it's worth thinking about for a moment. The inspired word, which is the special revelation of God, reveals something that you would never know from the infinite word. The infinite word is the cosmos, which reveals his glory. The inspired word reveals that the infinite word became what? The incarnate word. Who would have dreamed or supposed that could happen? That infinity and eternity could take humanity up into himself without diminishment of perfection and deity, and put a face on it, infinity and eternity. Who could have dreamed it? But yes, there's another step, that he would become the incarnate word in order to become the what word? Good for you. He's got it. My man, give that man a prize. He's got the system down. Because the idea now that who indwells you? Infinity and eternity. You see, most people don't get the grasp of the greatness of this message. It's beyond us, and we can't grasp it. But the more you use these images, the more you realize he is the lover of your soul. And as the incarnate word, he purchased his beloved on the cross so that we could have a relationship. As the incarnate word, he also, and now as the infinite word, he pursues us, protects us, and provides for her. So it's a romance, isn't it? At any rate, he does say, though, that the love of nature, when it becomes a religion, is beginning to be a god, therefore it becomes a demon. Every one of these loves can become a demon. Everyone has its own unique distortion, its own unique shadow, which can therefore be a unique form of hatred that particular love produces that no other love will have. So just as there's a bouquet of various loves, the human loves cannot become themselves, not fully, unless the agape of God infuses and enhances them and empowers them to be the loves they were intended to be. And you'll recall the loves that we talked about before. I add a fifth love, and it's the love of epithumia. I love chocolate. Remember I said that? Well, I don't have a relationship with this stuff unless I'm really kinky. But instead, I loved chocolate, and I knew I did. My parents said, you can't love chocolate, but I knew I did. But that's the love of epithumia, which is a love of desire, which is usually used in a negative sense, but it can be used in a positive or neutral sense. So we have an affirmation. We just like our love for music, you see, and our love for proper things being done, for good food and things of that nature. Those are legitimate desires, aren't they? And so you have these epithumia, but then the next one is the one we're about to go into now, and it's the love of what's called storge. It looks Storge. It looks like storg, but it's storge, and it's a love of one of the Greek names for love that's not used in the New Testament, which is interesting. The other one that's not used in the New Testament is eros, erotic love. But you have then epithumia, which is the love of desire for the subhuman. And then there is storge, which is the love of affection. It's what holds families together. And then the third love is the love of phileo, which is a love of what? Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. You see, it's friendship. It's the idea of friendship. And authentic friendship, by the way, I might parenthetically add, is the most countercultural thing you can do today. Because very few people have any. They're more lonely than ever for lots of reasons, which we won't go into. But the idea of friendship is powerful. And then there's another love, the love of eros, and erotic love, the romantic love, those kinds of components. And then the fifth love is the love that is intended to inspire them to become what they were intended to be, agape, the love of God, which is a love not of emotion, but the love of the will. And you know how I define agape. I've given it to you before. It's the steady intention of your will toward another's highest good. It's pretty simple to think about it. It's a love of the will. But it's steady. You notice it's always, and what does it tend? What does it want? What does it long for? It longs for your good, your betterment. And I've seen that, and we see agape when when you see what's happening, then you know this person loves me not for anything I've done, but because of just who I am, and gives me the dignity of desiring my highest good. Well, I can love my enemies that way because I can intend their highest good even though I don't like them. You see, so it's a powerful love, isn't it? And the agape of God is what's designed to take all the human loves, epithumia, storge, phileo, and eros, take those human loves and make them like a bouquet, you see, and elevate them to what they were intended to be so that they do not get distorted by their natural earthbound pull. Because left to the flesh, those loves perform perverse patterns of behavior, as we're going to see when we start talking about it. Storge. One last word, though. He has not only love for nature, but love for one's country is another love that he describes. And again, you well know that can be a tyrannical thing, because when it speaks with the voice of a god, it speaks with the voice of a devil. My country, right or wrong, becomes a statement that can be dangerous, if you see where I'm going with that. So that, what can happen is a particular attitude toward our country's past and toward that we're superior to others and so forth, and the duties and rights of a superior being toward the others. And so when the natural loves become lawless, they do not merely do harm to other loves. They themselves cease to be the loves they were, to be loves at all. Patriotism then has many faces, and he speaks about a false transcendence that's given to where people do things that are really outside of the realm of the divine authority of government. You see, so what can happen is there can be, each one of these loves has its own danger and downfall. Then he talks about love for animals, but he says, I'm going to save that. Even though it's for the subhuman, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about that more under Storge of affection, because our love for animals is a bit midway, and it's a bit of a human in it as well. It's got 3 legs and in the animal world and 1 in the human world. You see, it's kind of, and we shape them. And I still remember this woman who had loved this ugly mutt. It was just this bug-eyed monster. And she said, he's just a little person, isn't he? I couldn't stand the dog. And she trained it to become an even more nasty little creature by giving it all kinds of indulgences and so forth, and trying to make it a little person. It was the strangest thing. So there's some danger to these things as well. But this idea of Storge, or affection, is where we're going to be talking now. And it's the humblest and most widely diffused of all the loves. It's the humblest of all for various reasons. It's a need love, by the way, but what it needs is to give. And it's a gift love, but it needs to be needed. So you'll see what I mean by that. So even in animal life, and still more in our own, affection extends far beyond the relation of mother and young. This warm comfortableness, this satisfaction in being together, takes in all sorts of objects. It's the least discriminating of loves. Almost anyone can become an object of affection. The ugly, the stupid, even the exasperating. You see, it ignores the barriers of age or sex or class and education. It ignores even the barrier of species. And you can even see it in varying capacities, that kind of love. Like between Don Quixote and Sancho Panza is a kind of a storge. It's an affection there. The love that you have in The Wind in the Willows, where Kenneth Graham's wonderful, brilliant work. I read it out loud to Karen last year. The Wind in the Willows. If you're married, try that out. Read it out loud to each other. It's actually quite good. But the quaternion of mole, rat, badger, and toad suggests this amazing heterogeneity that's possible between those who are bound by affection, because it's brilliant. If you look at each one of them, they represent the 4 major personality types, and they're united together. They're just each one. Toad is an SP for sure, and badger is an SJ, and then you got rat is an NT, and mole is an NF. And it's pretty clear. And he had no idea that he's doing that, but that's what he's doing. And those are the 4 basic types that you see. But what binds that diverse group together? How can a badger be the SJ, the one who's law-bound and everything has to be done just well, with an SP like a toad, who on his wild ride goes and does nutty things and keeps buying cars and buying new things? The problem is he has too much wealth and he keeps doing stupid things with them. And just one fad after another. How can they be bound together? It's affection. It's a profound understanding that I doubt if we ever catch affection beginning, by the way, but it's often, it's noticed by people as in this humblest of love. It gives itself no airs. It usually needs absence or bereavement to set us praising those whom only affection binds us. See, these are not people who ordinarily would be sought out for their brilliance or their intellect, their capacities or whatever. Not necessarily. These are people who happen to have, it almost slinks or seeps through our lives in a very real way. He says, affection, besides being a love itself, can enter into the other loves, and that's true. So in marriage, in that relationship, the ideal would be for all 4 of the human loves to be bound together and then elevated into the bouquet of the divine love that elevates them and makes them a beautiful bouquet, you see. So affection should be a component of marriage. Friendship, eros, storge, epithumia, all those should be there. At any rate, we see him talking about this idea of, in the end, it makes appreciations possible, but which for it might never have existed. I'll give you an example of affection in my own life. My two sisters. Now, one is with Jesus, but I must tell you that they're just utterly different from me. If you ever met them, a couple of you may have, I think, have. Bick, you've met. How would you describe my sisters, Bick? I have no idea. Wasn't it a surreal experience for you to go with me to North Carolina and see where they were living and the bazaar? Could words really describe it? I don't know. We what? I slept in the Green Bay Packer. Oh, yes, you did. You slept in the Green Bay Packer room. That's right. Remember, it's crazy stuff. It's crazy stuff on every level. I have nothing in common with my family there, but I loved my sister dearly. And one thing we did have in common was that I used to read book trails to her. And that was a series of books that was produced in 1928, I think it was. And it was a set of 8 books. You look up book trails on eBay. You can see there's an 8-volume set. And it had there were 8 volumes. And the one was for baby feet, and then the Highway to Adventure, and all. And it got a little bit further up on the reading scale as you went through them, as the idea. And I would read them out loud to my sister, even though she was 2 years older than me. When I was a kid in Dumont, New Jersey, and we were there till I was 8. I was 8 years old when we left there. And I used to read her. Then one of her favorite ones was this called The Teeny Tiny, and it was a clever little story. And it has a shock at the end. And then I'd read got into the habit of reading these things out loud to her in the last 2 years of her life. Something made me just call her up and say, let me read you a story. And I'd already purchased her a set of those 8, so she had them. And so I had mine. Go get your book. I want you to look at the illustrations. And I would describe the illustration to her by phone and describe what it meant, and then the nature of the story, and exegete the story for her. I wish I had recorded those. Some of them were extraordinarily meaningful encounters. But what we had was a connection. We remembered our past in doing that, you see? And so that was the thing that connected us. And I'd read one story after it, and she'd never know when I would do it. And she was very ill by this time. But Wayne, her husband, said that when I would call and she knew it was me to read her a story, and she never knew what it had been, she would shriek with delight. She was like a kid. And she would shriek with delight and get her book, and I would read to her. Well, the last time we spoke, she called me, and after this, we'd been doing this maybe about 15 or so times I never knew what it would be. Suddenly she called me, never had done that before, and asked me to read her a story. And she had a specific one in mind. It was a very meaningful story, and I knew that night that would be the last time I'd ever speak with her, and so it was. I would never see her again on this earth. But I read that story out loud at her graveside. You see, what I'm saying is affection can bring people who have nothing in common because her interests were totally other than mine. But yet there was a little bit, wasn't there, of something that we grew up with. And that created a bond, an affection, an affinity for a person who I otherwise would have never known or chosen to know. Our tastes and everything else was different. So you can see how that works then. The glory of affection is it unites people who most emphatically, even comically, are not people who, if they had not found themselves put down by fate in the same household or community, would have nothing to do with each other. That's why it's a humble love. Do you understand that? So it shows there's a beauty to it. And it's affection that creates the taste, teaching us to notice, then to endure, then to smile at, and then to enjoy, and finally to appreciate people who happen to be there. They just happen to be there, and that's why. That's what home is like, you see, in many ways. They are themselves odder than you could have believed and worth far more than we could have guessed. these people that affection brings us with. But there is also a rivalry between all natural loves and the love of God. And here he looks at the downside of affection, as first of affection as a need love. Because nearly all the characteristics of love, this love, are ambivalent. There's a kind of a problem, first with affection as a need love. Let me explain. He says our craving, our need for the affection of others. And that by itself is a natural built-in thing, and it's a good thing by itself, but not unless it's brought up to a higher good, because it can become its own unique form of manipulation and hatred. And you'll know what we're talking about if you just stop and think about how people have abused this. So what we have here is the most unlovable parent or child may be full of such ravenous love that they become almost like a vampire, that they have to suck from other people to get their own vitality. I've seen this, and you have too. If people are already unlovable, they can often have a resentful self-pity. It's amazing. They seal up every fountain for which they are thirsty. And he says, such people always desire the same proof of our love. You see, you have to prove it. And so he uses a wonderful example of one woman he calls a maternal vampire. You see? And he says, he writes that we hear a great deal about the rudeness of the rising generation. He says, I'm an oldster myself. Remember, he was born in 1898, and this is about 1962. That's not an oldster to me anymore. But I have been far more impressed by the bad manners of parents to children than those by children to parents. And that's an interesting point that he uses and illustrates. Affection, at its best, practices a courtesy, which is incomparably more subtle and sensitive and deep than the public kind. There's private kinds of courtesies, as you know, and there are public courtesies. But often people treat their own loved ones with less civility than they do people that are total strangers, because they take them for granted, and that's the problem. It's like an old slipper. They become so accustomed to it, they take it for granted, and therefore the person is not appreciated. You see the downside. This is a very powerful thing. It's a rich and wonderful love, and yet it has its downward pull. Those who leave their manners behind them when they come home from the dance or the sherry party have no real courtesy even there. So he says, the affection at its best wishes neither to wound nor to humiliate nor to domineer. The better the affection, the more unerringly it knows that there are certain forms of love that have an art of love. And he describes it in this way. He says, if we're not careful, affection will take liberty. He then uses them. Sometimes one can use these how to manage another person spitefully in obedience to his resentments, or ruthlessly in obedience to his egotism, or at best stupidly lacking the art. And he takes liberties. And so the difference, as he goes on here, to talk about the change, for example, with affection, is a threat. See if you can't know this in your own experience, and this is true. So that he says, a brother and a sister, or two brothers, for sex here is not at work, grow to a certain age sharing everything. They have read the same comics, climbed the same trees, been pirates or spacemen together, taken up and abandoned stamp collecting at the same moment. Then a dreadful thing happens. One of them flashes ahead and discovers poetry or science or serious music, or perhaps undergoes a religious conversion. His life is flooded with a new interest. The other cannot share it. He's left behind. I doubt whether even the infidelity of a wife or a husband raises a more miserable sense of desertion or a fiercer jealousy that this can sometimes do. The jealousy of the thing itself is what takes place. He says, speaks, for example, of few things in ordinary peacetime life of a civilized country are more fiendish than the rancor with which the whole unbelieving family will turn on the one member of it who has become a Christian, or a lowbrow family on the one who shows signs of becoming an intellectual. You see, it's scary to them, and that need love then is challenged, and it becomes a form of resentment, and then often in manipulation. It's almost like a reaction to a desertion or like a robbery that something has happened, as he describes it very well. And so it becomes a distorted thing. It's you can so that's one form of distortion, but the other form of distortion is affection as a gift love. So affection as a need love becomes so needy that it manipulates, it resents change, it can take advantage of the other person, or just not even consider their needs at all and becomes very self-centered. What about me? And always. But affection as a gift love, strangely enough, also has its distortions. And he's going to illustrate it with one of my favorite illustrations Lewis ever wrote. It's about this character. Obviously, he's got somebody in mind, but he calls her Mrs. Fidget. Mrs. Fidget, who died a few months ago. It is really astonishing how her family has brightened up. The drawn look has come from her husband's face. He begins to be able to laugh. The younger boy, whom I'd always thought an embittered, peevish little creature, turns out to be quite human. The elder, who was hardly ever at home except when he was in bed, is nearly always there now and has begun to reorganize the garden. The girl, who was always supposed to be delicate, though I never found out what exactly the trouble was, now has the riding lessons which were once out of the question, dances all night and plays any amount of tennis. Even the dog, who was never allowed out except on a lead, is now a well-known member of the lamppost club in their road. I love that. Mrs. Fidget has very often said that she lived for her family, and it was not untrue. Everyone in the neighborhood knew it. She lives for her family. They said, what a wife and mother. She did all the washing. True, but she did it badly, but they could have afforded to send it out to a laundry, and they frequently begged her not to do it. But she did. There was always a hot lunch for anyone who was at home, and always a hot meal at night, even in midsummer. They implored her not to provide this. They protested almost with tears in their eyes and with truth that they liked cold meals. It made no difference. She was living for her family. You see how it gets distorted? She always sat up to welcome you at home if you were late at night. 2 or 3 in the morning, it made no odds. He said, you would always find the frail, pale, weary face awaiting you, like a silent accusation. Which meant, of course, that you couldn't, with any decency, go out very often. She was always making things to being, in her own estimation, I'm no judge myself, an excellent amateur dressmaker and a great knitter. And of course, unless you were a heartless brute, you had to wear the things. The vicar tells me that since her death, the contributions of that family alone to sales of work outweigh all of his other parishioners put together. They got rid of all the stuff they imposed upon her. So they were under the servitude toward her gift love, her need to be gift given. You see how cleverly, this is very clever. And then her care for their health, she bore the whole burden of that daughter's delicacy alone. The doctor, an old friend, and it was not being done on national health, was never allowed to discuss matters with his patient. After the briefest examination of her, he was taken into another room by the mother. The girl was to have no worries, no responsibility for her own health, only loving care, caresses, special foods, horrible tonic wines, and breakfast in bed. For Mrs. Fidget, as she so often said, would work her fingers to the bone for her family. They couldn't stop her. Nor could they, being decent people, quite sit still and watch her do it. They had to help. Indeed, they were always having to help. That is, catch this, they did things for her to help her do things for them which they didn't want done. I mean, it's a brilliant summary, isn't it? As for the dear dog, it was to her, she said, just like one of the children. Just as I said before, just like a little person. It was, in fact, as like one of them as she could make it. But since it had no scruples, it got on rather better than they. and though vetted, dieted, and guarded within an inch of its life, contrives sometimes to reach the dustbin or the dog next door. The vicar says Mrs. Fidget is now at rest. Let us hope she is. What's quite certain is that her family are. That's a hard word, I know, but you understand what he's looking at. Of course, we don't know, but I can identify a few Mrs. Fidgets that I've known. All of you have known some like that. It is a distortion. It's a distorted good because evil is never a thing in itself. Evil is always a distorted good. It's a parasite. It's an ontological parasite. It has no existence. Just like there's no such thing as cold itself. Cold is an absence of heat. There's no such thing as darkness. It's an absence of light. It's not a thing in itself. It's this distorted good. So also, then, any kind of thing that we want to have can be distorted for the wrong amount, the wrong reason, the wrong time, the wrong power. And so those things are good. So they are distorted goods and disordered loves. Distorted goods and disordered loves. The loves are not being ordered properly because you cannot love a person really best if you don't love Jesus more than that person, because it takes the agape of God to empower, infuse, and inflame and energize the horizontal human loves, you see. So it's a heavy task, and here's the heavy task on this gift love. You know what it must do? It must work toward its own abnegation. That is to say, we must aim at making ourselves superfluous. The hour when we can say, they need me no longer, should be our reward. Instead, it's often some kind of a thespian, they need me no longer, whine. But no, you should want them to need you no longer, and rather than making you dependent upon them. It's like a doll that you kind of, like an adult doll, you keep on playing with the thing. It's crazy. A much higher love, a love which desires the good of the object as such, from whatever source that good comes, must step in and help or tame the instinct before it can make that abnegation. It'll never do that of its own accord, and this is his wisdom. So there's a lot of understanding that goes with this. It's a gift love and therefore regards itself unselfish is a dangerous thing. I'm being unselfish. See how the closer it gets to the real thing, the more nefarious its darkness becomes, because the greater the good. This is why it's really a bad worm can't be a bad worm. I mean, how bad can a worm be? That's why I always wondered, how can roaches earn good karma? You see, you come back and just stay out of people's kitchen, and they can only be so bad. And dogs and cats can only be so bad. Humans, it's another matter. They can become more malevolent, more wicked, and angels even more. And an archangel, you get the idea. The higher the good, the more its distortion, the power of distortion becomes. And so, but we have this idea of the other kinds of affection. The affection of a patron for a protege is another example, where the patron needs to be needed almost and needs to give, constantly giving. And when the protege suddenly outdoes the teacher, suppose that a person is a violinist and he has a protege and suddenly discovers that the protege is playing and performing better. Should they want that? Yes. But often they're threatened by it. You see, it can hurt their relationship with him. And he speaks of a sad case of Dr. Quartz. No university boasted a more effective or devoted teacher. He spent the whole of himself on his pupils. He made an indelible impression on nearly all of them. He was the object of much well-merited hero worship. Naturally and delightfully, they continued to visit him after the tutorial relationship had ended, went around to his house of an evening and had famous discussions. But the curious thing is that it never lasted. Sooner or later, it might be within a few months or even a few weeks, came the fatal evening when they knocked on his door and they were told that the doctor was engaged, and they would always be engaged. They were banished from him forever. This was because at their last meeting they had rebelled. They had asserted their independence. In other words, they started doing things that were better than him, or different than him. You see how that works? Even this desire of equipping a person as a gift love can be a distorted thing that then resents another's achievements and is not really truly other-centered. Same thing happens with pampering an animal. To learn that someone is fond of animals tells us very little until we know in what way. For there are two ways. On the one hand, the higher and domesticated animal is, so to speak, a bridge between us and the rest of nature. We at all times feel somewhat painfully our human isolation from the subhuman world, the atrophy of instinct which our intelligence entails, our excessive self-consciousness, the innumerable complexities of our situation, our inability to live in the present. If we could only shuffle it all off, we must not, and instantly we can't become beasts, but we can be with the beast. It's personal enough to give the word with a real meaning, yet it remains very largely an unconscious little bundle of biological impulses. He speaks about it in this way. A pet can be a substitute for people. You can keep it permanently infantile, reduce it to permanent invalidism, cut it off from all genuine animal well-being, and compensate for this by creating needs for countless little indulgences which only you can grant. You ever seen this? Because it happens a lot more than we would like to think. The unfortunate creature thus becomes very useful to the rest of the household. It acts as a stump or drain. You're too busy spoiling a dog's life to spoil others. Dogs are better for this purpose than cats. A monkey, I'm told, is best of all. But he goes on to say, he says, probably it cannot fully realize the wrong which you've done it. Better still, you would never know if it did. The most downtrodden human driven too far may one day turn and blurt out a terrible truth. Animals can't speak. So people do a lot of things with animals. Those who say, the more I see of men, the better I like dogs. And it is true. I often describe, if you take your dog and put it and throw it in your trunk and throw your best friend in your trunk and keep him in there for an hour and open it up after an hour, who'll be happy to see you? Who'll be happy to see you? You know who it'll be. God, help me become the person my dog thinks I am. You know, that sort of mindset thing. But those who find in animals a relief from the demands of human companionship will be well advised to examine their real reasons, because there may be an attempt to control or live vicariously in that respect. But if he goes, and this is a very important point as we conclude, affection, he says, and I think he's right, is responsible for 9/10 of whatever solid and durable happiness there is in our natural lives. So it's a very powerful thing, that affection we have for our friends and for our pets. It's a very important thing. And so it's a way of looking. It says, affection produces happiness if and only if there is common sense and give and take and decency. In other words, only if something more and other than affection is added. You must have common sense or reason. Give and take is justice. Decency has to do with goodness, patience, self-denial, humility, and the continual intervention of the far higher sort of love than affection in itself can ever be. That is the whole point. If we try to live by affection alone, affection will go bad on us. And if affection is made the absolute sovereign of a human life, the seeds will germinate. Love, having become God, a God becomes a demon. Let us pray that we will have affection and understand its downward pull, its temptations, but it's also its upward power, its opportunities. And love people and combine our affection with the agape of choosing and always the steady intention of your will to their highest good. Father, we thank you that we have come to know you and to be known by you in a rich and powerful way. We ask that you would grant us to take the love of Christ and let that rule in our lives. In his name, amen.